Did you take this? You guys want to get started?
Yeah.
To make sure that that was right.
You guys want to get started? So, thank you for coming. Cool.
I got a drink.
Great. Thanks for everybody coming tonight. Seems like it's about 35, 40 people signed up, so we met like the halfway point of maybe people stream in, but I think the next day probably took over. But tonight we got a great presentation by Derek Eder. I think he'll have some really cool stuff, but related to I think some of the previous conversations that we've been having. So it's great to kind of have you here. One thing that I hope that you plug in, we talk about, and I was trying to make it last night for the open hack night.
Oh yeah, sure.
It's a really cool concept, and I think probably a lot of people in this room would be really interested in checking it out.
Cool. Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
All right, I can get started. So thanks for having me. My name is Derek. I wear a couple of different hats. Oh wait, before I get to that, so I told a few of you when you're coming in what this is. I didn't make this, but a guy in New York that I do know did. And so it's a fun thing to watch. So the city of New York has a bunch of data they just collected from all the cab companies about where all the trips are, so where people are getting picked up and where people are getting dropped off. And they just collect that information for regulatory purposes, you can imagine. And this guy, Chris Wong, who made this app, decided to file a Freedom of Information request, which is basically a mechanism for getting the government to give you data. And they typically do it. They have to do it under the law with some exceptions. And so he asked for a year's worth of this data and got something on the order of like, I don't know, 70 million trips or something like that. Something crazy big number. And it's so much data, and people did a lot of cool stuff with it. It got a bunch of news about it, just getting the data out. And then he ended up making this app with a sample of that data. So he took maybe 20 or so different cabs and plugged in where people got picked up and where they got dropped off, and he plugged the information into Google Maps to say what's the likely route that the person drove to get to these two spots. So that's what the blue lines are. And then just plays it back over a 24-hour period. So it calls it a day in the life of a New York City cab driver. So it's really fascinating. You can kind of see it's doing like a little Tron thing with the traces of where the cab's been all day. And when it's yellow like that, it's in an empty taxi. And it's basically, we don't know where the taxi is, but he's just moving the circle to the point where we know where he is again, and then we'll get to the report sheet. And then we have on the right, like the running total of how many passengers, how much money they made. So this is a pretty cool visualization of data. And it's very much in line with the kind of stuff that I do every day. So anyways, this is nyctaxi.herokuapp.com. You should totally get a better domain for that, but it's okay. If you just Google a day in the life of New York City cab driver, you'll find this. So anyways, this is me. I am an open data web developer, a title I made up for myself. So I do a lot of stuff in the web, and I do a lot of stuff with open data, so I just figured, okay, that's what I am. I do kind of a lot of things, all encompassing that title in a couple of different ways. I own a company called DataMade that does this stuff as a consulting business. I'm a co-founder of a group called Open City that makes applications similar to the one that we showed with open data, using data from the city of Chicago, Cook County. And then I also run an event every Tuesday called the OpenGov Hack Night. And let's see here, I'll show you. This is this website, opengovhacknight.org. So this event is great. It's been going on for about 2 years now. Let me see if I can actually, I'll show you a picture of what it looked like yesterday. I think I tweeted this out. Yeah, here we go. No, I would not need to. This is a picture. It's one of those like panorama ones. So that's me on the left, and this is the whole room. So this is in 1871. You guys been to 1871 before? It's in the merchandise part. This is in their like largest free room that we use every week, and it was like 80 people in there, and they're all there to talk about and learn about OpenGov and open data. And so I think this is a good, it's a good indication about how much interest there is, at least in Chicago, and the kind of community that we've been developing over the last 3 years or so around this stuff. So I could go in kind of a couple of different directions about how we got to this point. I've done a talk before on the history of OpenGov in Chicago, which includes people before me that have sort of done stuff. Tolva's in there. I think some of you guys were here for John Tolva's talk. He's part of that story. And I have sort of a set of slides I could go through and sort of tell this story. I could go that route, or I could just show off a bunch of apps, maybe in some sort of chronological order as well. So I think those are choose your own adventure. Which one would you like to have? Maybe
the most meaningful for us architects.
That is actually what I'm asking you. Which of those two is the most meaningful for you architects? You want to do like a show of hands? We vote? We do democracy?
Let's do that.
Okay, democracy. So who wants the history of OpenGov in Chicago? Raise your hand. Who wants? I hope someone who wants the other one where I just show how much collapse. All right, democracy is spoken. Great. Okay, fun. This will be more fun anyways, and it'll be more interactive. So my history with all this stuff starts with, this is Open City. This is a group that I co-founded. It's a we make apps with open data to improve transparency and understanding of our government. We started about 3 years ago, and before we even called ourselves Open City, we were just a group of developers. And I was just talking about, sorry, not this website. I was just talking about this. Sorry, who's the director of the AIA Chicago? I forgot her name. She set us up in here. Joan. Okay, so I was just talking to her. I used to work for a company called Webitex, and they did the website for AIA Chicago, so it was like full circle. So I got my start at Webitex doing this stuff. Webitex is a small web design and development firm here in Chicago, and I've been working there for about 6 years. And around 2011, we got a new mayor, and that new mayor decided to have an open data policy, which meant that they would put resources behind releasing data that they have, the government has in their sort of different silos and different departments, and make it publicly available on something called the City of Chicago Data Portal. City of Chicago. Oh, look, someone's been here already. Great. This is it. So this is the clearinghouse for data, and like open data from the City of Chicago. It's free. There's a bunch of really cool stuff on here, like crime and potholes, and they just published some stuff on beach water quality. So one of the first data sets that they released was on lobbying, which at the time I didn't know anything about. I actually couldn't really tell you that I know too much more about it now, but I learned quite a bit through the process of just looking at this data that the Department of Ethics collects. So this data got released. It had information in it like who are the lobbyists that are registered in the City of Chicago, who's paying them to do what, and what city agencies are they lobbying. So we decided, well, this data is interesting. It's new. It's kind of juicy. What can we do with this data? What can we do with our skills in designing and web development to sort of try to make sense of it? So we decided, Paul Baker, who's the CEO at Webitex, put together a group of us who were he thought were good developers and designers, people who might be interested in this stuff. We just decided to try and make an app. And the results of that are ChicagoLobbyists.org, which is this guy right here. So I like to describe this app as a Facebook for lobbyists. So you can see all the lobbyists that have ever been active in the city of Chicago and how much money they were paid. So this guy, Theo Brunswell, anybody know him? Chances are though, if you wanted to get anything done in terms of procuring business with the city of Chicago, he's probably the guy to talk to. And this is the kind of things he does. So he procures business for Oracle and Dish Network and many other companies maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't, right? And these are the different city agencies that he lobbies on behalf of these clients to do, right? So this is all in the data, and we just kind of took it and tried to make some sense out of it. So this is Theo's page. We've got, he made around $1 million in 2010. We also have an entire list, sort of a ranking, if you will, of who are the top paid lobbyists. Jay Doherty, he runs the City Club, I think, as well, if you've heard of that. So some of these names might be familiar. I'm sure some of these names will be very familiar. This was a surprise. The Salvation Army was the top payer of lobbyists, at least in 2010. And what did they do? Well, let's find out. They hired some people to do land transfer work and zoning, and they paid them quite a bit of money to do so. And they apparently work with one particular firm. So this is just us sort of naively looking at the data and saying, what can we do with this to make sense of it? We don't necessarily have any opinions about lobbyists, whether or not they're good or bad, because we frankly don't feel like we're in a position to say anything about that, because we don't know enough about how the entire system works to really make any claims like that. And that was kind of our naive approach going into it. It ended up being one of the sort of core tenets of the types of apps that we do, is to have a non-biased approach to showing off the data. And we kind of stumbled into that just because we were being a little bit cautious about what we were showing, what we were saying, because, hey, this is up here for the whole world to see. So be careful what you say, or you may say something wrong. But when we did that, it actually ended up giving us a lot more credibility, I think, in terms of what we were showing. We're not someone could go to the site and say, oh, this is just what the data says, and not necessarily, as opposed to someone saying, oh, look at all these crooks, hijacking your government, right? And that might make people like less inclined to, believe what you're saying, right? Believe your numbers, right? So this is really the first app, like I said, that I worked on, my first civic app. And a lot of the things that I've sort of continued on from this point on have sort of stayed the same. I mean, there's a lot of attributes to this app that are present in pretty much every app that I've built, even today. So all the code is open source, so you can go onto a website called GitHub. Has anybody ever heard of that before? It's a place to share code. All the code is open source, so you can see exactly how we built the site. All the data is, again, it's from the city of Chicago, so it's open and available, and you can take that data. And it's about sort of transparency and just explaining this thing that affects everybody in the city of Chicago in some way or another. You've been affected by lobbying, right? Because their end result is changing the policies and the business of government. That's their job, to help navigate that stuff. And so it has this sort of open and transparency kind of goal to it, to sort of help explain this thing that was maybe not easy to understand. In fact, maybe you needed to hire a lobbyist to understand this stuff. But we just try to put it out there for people to understand. So this is the first app. And we did it in volunteer time, over like nights and weekends. We presented it at a hackathon that Tolva actually put together. It was a partnership between the city of Chicago and Google at their Google offices. And so we did this work, and we worked on it during this hackathon event back in 2011, and we presented this thing. And I don't know if you guys did Tolva show the site off when he did his talk. Okay, well, he has before. So that was one of the really cool things about this. It's like, all right, we did this app. It's really cool. We think it's cool. But the city loved it. They thought it was amazing. They're like, look, we just put this data out there, and then we got a free website out of it. Like, win-win for everybody, right? Like transparency for the citizens, and it costs the government $0, right? So for a while, Tolo was just like walking around with this slide deck that he was kind of using to describe what he was doing as his job as chief technology officer, and sort of saying, this is like open government, this is what's important. And this is one of the slides, like, look, like Chicago lobbyists, this is a cool thing that has come out of our community. So having that really positive feedback coming from, you know, not only our peers, but like the city, it's like, oh wow, the city is paying attention to this stuff, right? That was like a really motivating thing for us. So I got really excited by the fact that I could use the skills that I had making websites to make something that people really thought was interesting. And, you know, not that I wasn't doing interesting work at my job, but like, this is something that I had ownership of, I had control of, we decided what we would and wouldn't include. So that was a really empowering kind of experience, and one that I really wanted to keep pursuing. So this is what started it all for me, and I've continued doing this stuff ever since. Another quick story about this app is after we launched it, actually when we launched it, there was a bunch of data that we thought was kind of missing from what the city had released. So, for example, you could see that Theodore Brunswald had made a certain amount of money and had a certain list of clients, but at the time that was not actually made explicit as far as what client paid them how much money. All we knew was just this list on one side and the total amount on the other. So it was kind of a missing connection between, like, what are the details there? So we published an original version of the site that basically said, we like had all kinds of disclaimers all over it saying, like, this is what we're showing you, but if we had this data, we could show you this, or we can't show you this information because it doesn't exist. So we basically littered it with all kinds of, like, something's not quite right here, something's missing messages, and we sort of use that as a way to sort of prod the city into releasing more data. So that actually ended up working, and it led to a meeting in City Hall with Brett Goldstein, who's the former chief data officer of the city of Chicago, and a couple of people from the Department of Ethics, including the person whose job it was to hand transcribe the forms that the lobbyists have to fill out, which is like, there's a law, like a city ordinance that says lobbyists have to fill out this form and submit their activity, which is basically like the source of all this data. We met the guy whose job it was to take those forms and like type them into a spreadsheet and like upload it to the data pool. So we met that guy, he's a very nice guy. And we asked them all these questions, like, could you include this data? Could you include that data? What does this form mean? What does this like attribute on this data set mean? And they were like, okay, we can make some changes. Give us a couple weeks and we'll get back to you. And then about 2 weeks after that meeting, we saw that the city released a new data, like an updated data set, and the mayor went on to Chicago Tonight. It was like, I have an announcement. I'm here to show that we have more transparency data on lobbying, and here it is. And they released a press statement saying, Chicago lobbyists is great, and we're giving the data out, and they're using it to make the site better. So I love that story because it shows that there's an interest on the government side to do better and to have sort of this, be part of this iterative approach of sort of releasing the data and then having some outsider feedback and improving the data based on that. And it ends up making their stuff better, it ends up making our stuff better. So again, it's like a win-win situation, which that sort of spirit of cooperation continues to this day. Yeah, question?
So now this is from 2010.
Correct.
Is there a way to get the most current information?
Yeah, right. So this is, we're getting into this now. So this app we created in 2011, and we had 2010 data, so the data was available. And then about 6 months after that, they released a new lobbyist disclosure system, which is like taking the paper forms that I mentioned earlier and doing it all online. Sounds great, right? Except that the format of the data completely changed. And at that point, we were like, well, the site's already good for demonstration purposes. I'm not really motivated as a volunteer to update it. And it was kind of one of these first sort of situations that we got into that it's kind of ended up being a constant conversation, which is like, man, like, it's really fun to make something. It's not fun to maintain something, right? There's no, like, what's the, like, if I were to spend a whatever, I don't know, say it took me like 50 hours to get the data fixed and updated and add all the functionality to the site to make that possible, what would be like the benefit to me? Like, the site's already up. I can come to an event like this and point to it and say, look at this cool thing. I can go to the city of Chicago and say, hey, look, this thing is cool, it still exists. But what, like, there's no, like, I'm under no requirement by the city to keep this data, this website updated, because they didn't pay me, right, to do it. So it was one of those things where, like, early on, we were like, this is great, but how do we sustain ourselves? And it's something that over sort of the course of 3 years, like, a bunch of different ideas were tried out, and essentially what I ended up doing is starting my own consulting company, right, to do work of this nature for, like, on a consulting type basis. And that is that way, like, it sounds like obvious to say that that's how we ended up doing it, but at the time it wasn't. It's like, oh wait, we want to keep doing this cool stuff. Maybe if we just, like, ask people to give us money, we'll do, like, they'll just give us money to keep doing this work. And that, like, you know, didn't ever pan out. They're like, well, maybe we'll start a nonprofit. And that was kind of a whole debate about, like, how do you know, if you're a nonprofit, how do you get money? You have to apply for grants. How do you get grants? By proposing certain things and making sure that it's what the funder wants, not necessarily what you want, right? So I ended up just starting my own company and doing this stuff and using sort of that engine to kind of keep the stuff going, which is why I'm still doing this every day, why I do continue to make apps similar to this just on a volunteer basis. So long story short is the data is out there. Although they haven't updated it since 2012 for some reason. And I have been kind of in the back of my mind just looking for an excuse to update it. But right now, none has, like, presented itself, right? So, like, maybe if someone was like, hey, I have a real interest in having this data available, maybe that's the city, maybe that's some advocacy organization, right? But, like, somebody needs to have sort of a vested interest in having something like this. And I can get into, like, another episode where we tried to fill an RFP for the city of Chicago to build a system like that, and we just didn't get there. It's actually very hard for volunteers, like small companies, let alone volunteers, to do any official work for the city of Chicago due to procurement rules, basically. I can get into that later. So
unless they had their website was in this format and the data they enter. But they were, in other words, they're maintaining their own website.
Right. Yeah, they could. And honestly, it's like if I were to, in the perfect world, the city of Chicago, I think, should own this. Or it could be like maybe some local, like, watchdog / like advocacy group, maybe a newspaper might be interested in owning this. I could see value in either way, right? Because if the city owns it, they're going to maybe have a certain perspective on this stuff. And they're maybe going to be, I've found that typically when the city does it, they're going to be erring more on the side of liability and making sure they're not saying anything inaccurate to the detriment of, like, usability and speaking in layman's terms. And as opposed to maybe it's like a journalism outfit, like the Tribune want to take it over. They might be looking for, gotchas, right? So, like, it depends on who owns it, right? I don't know of an organization that would maintain it in its current state, right? So that's another thing to consider. Is like, who has the interest?
But that's sort of the point of open data, right?
Which is
that anyone should be able to look at a particular data set and maybe produce a bias out of it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
in your case, no bias, right?
Right. And like I say no bias, but there's some, right? We're saying like money, like we list people, like we show the top 5 paid lobbyists, so we're saying something, right? You have to have some sort of choice. But yeah, I think that is one of the things that comes out of it. I'm sure people have taken this lobbyist data and used it for their own ends. But in the kind of world that I operate in, typically the goal is citizen focused and just really trying to explain what's going on. Right? That's the approach we take. But yeah, I mean that's actually one of the things that some people in government who are like less excited about open data are very worried about. Is like, oh, well, if we put this out there, someone can just do whatever they want with it. And we're like, yeah, that's the point, right? the data is out there, and you have no idea what someone's going to do with it. But sometimes they make this, right? And oftentimes it ends up making the government look good, actually. Because like again, like that whole story I told with the mayor, like, oh, transparency, right?
But one thing that's missing maybe is the legislation that was lobbied for.
Sure, right.
You said
oh, totally.
156
Exactly.
items.
Yep.
Not say which items.
No, exactly. So herein lies like part of this is known to us now what the situation is. Now that we've made this app, what has it done? It's answered maybe a few questions, but like opened up a whole new world of more questions, right? And in fact, it's actually very difficult. And like ask any reporter this, like it's very, very difficult to like look at some data and find like a quid pro quo, right? Like if you think that you can just like say like, oh look, this campaign donation led to this thing, like they're never that explicit, right? Only an idiot would do it that way, right? Like so, it's actually kind of hard to like really put this full picture together because you can imagine, all right, lobbyists play a part in the business of government, right? But then, like you mentioned, there's all the aldermen and all the legislation that gets proposed and written before it's even proposed and then voted on, right? And then there's the implementation of that, right? And there's all sorts of stuff about campaign finance too that you also have to start looking at when you are trying to think about who's influencing who, right? Like why did this ordinance get proposed in the first place, right? So there's a ton of things like that, and the data is starting to become available for it on the federal level, but also on the local level, like in Chicago. But it's hard work to figure out, like, is there a way really to show that kind of relationship? I think no one's really demonstrated that yet, that full picture, because there's a lot of work to do that. I think it's possible to do. It's just like there's more that needs to be done. So I can move on to more apps. Lobbyists, right? Good times.
Well, what's amazing about that is why somebody like the Salvation Army would even have to pay a lobbyist to do anything. Why can't organizations go directly to whomever they need to and directly rather than go through a lobbyist? And that's very interesting.
Why indeed, right? I mean, I think the answer from my perspective is that it's complicated. Like how many different employees are, like how many different departments would you have to coordinate with just to get, this particular plot of land like approved for your new location, right? I mean, you gotta go to the alderman, you gotta go to the Department of Planning and Development. There's all kinds of pieces involved, and that's frankly why you hire a lobbyist. So because they know who you go talk to, right? And this is this process, and this is how you get, your proposal in front of the alderman that matters, right? And
expedite.
Right, basically, they're like, you could even consider them like navigators of this crazy, complicated system, right? And frankly, that's why a lot of them come from government, right? Because they know it really well. And if you know it really well, you're very valuable to certain people, which is a good way to make a living, right? So, you can think about it in a lot of different ways. Right? You can think of like lobbying is bad. That's kind of like the sort of the narrative you hear about, like, oh, get the lobbying, out of government. There's too much influence happening from non-citizens. But you could also think of it as like, yeah, well, like, how would you get anything done without lobbyists in some cases, right? So, that's what I've observed at this point.
So did you get any pushback from lobbyists? You try to remain unbiased, but obviously you're publishing a lot of information.
Yeah.
So
we haven't, frankly, like, even though this has been out there for 3 years now, haven't actually had any lobbyists that I know are listed on this site actually contact us. We've been contacted by people looking for jobs at lobbying firms, thinking that we were some sort of like listing service. And frankly, like, we get all of our traffic from Google on this site because all of a sudden, all these pages are now indexed by Google. Yeah. And when you look up Theodore Runsvall, it's like we're one of the top hits. And so people use it for information about, like, I could actually see it benefiting lobbyists more than hurting, right? Like, if I'm this guy, this is advertisement for me, right? Because it's like, look, this guy knows how to get stuff done. he's very effective. People pay him a lot of money. He does all these things for all these clients. Look how good he is, right? So you can think about it that way too.
So flipping it around,
Yeah.
you're saying that you're doing this for free, or you did this for free.
Yeah.
Do you ever think about approaching lobbyists?
Yeah, I mean, we thought about it a little bit and decided not to pursue that avenue. We thought about ways to try to monetize this site, like to put up a paywall and say, if you want access to our, treasure trove of information on lobbyists, then like you gotta pay $5 or something, right? But we decided that the goal of that's not the goal of the site. The goal of the site is to, again, help people in Chicago understand this one very this one piece of a puzzle that is just like, how does your city work, right? And it felt really gross, the idea of putting up a paywall, the idea of taking data that was made open, freely available by the city, and then like locking it down. And frankly, like that's actually a thing that's a very common thing, right? Like if you ever used census data before, I don't even know how many companies like just take census data that is again paid for by the federal government to be collected by the Census Bureau and then released for free for anybody to use. They just take that data, repackage it, make it easier for you to use, and they sell it, right? And that's a thing. That's an entire vertical of companies that do that, right? And I do know, for philosophical reasons. Okay, so let's move on to another.
How long did it take the analysis of the data to be put into, to analyze it and put it into this format? So from when you had, my understanding is you had, the forms that that they had collected and analyzed data, but you derived this information from that. So obviously this was a manual process.
Yeah, well, they published the data as a spreadsheet. So we basically got started at that point. Actually, they published it as a set of spreadsheets. So there was like a spreadsheet on here's all the registered lobbyists, and then there's another spreadsheet that was like here's all the lobbyist activities. And they kind of had to do some like detective work to figure out how those were all related. So that took actually like a bit of time. But once we figured out how everything was related to each other, we were able to frankly just put it into a database, and then when we like loaded it all in and like we made a prototype version of this homepage, we're like, oh, okay, here's Theodore Brunswell. He's like, I want that, right? So like the most of the effort for the site, there's a good chunk that went into like just figuring out the data and understanding it and loading it into a database that we can do stuff like this with. And then most of the effort actually went into designing the detailed pages and figuring out what to show and everything on. I can show you. City council is surprisingly the most lobbied. And just deciding how this page should be outlined and everything like that. Yes, there are like weird just question marks. And again, this is all self-reported, right? So it's like some of these things are super undescriptive. It's like this person lobbied. Here, there's a great one. There's a lot of abbreviations that we had to figure out what that meant. What was that other one I saw? Anyways, there's like so some of these things I still don't know what they are and what they mean. But yeah, PD. I was like, what's PD mean? And it means planning and development. But that's just something I learned after like talking to people about this stuff. So. Okay, so let's walk on to another app. Okay, fine with this one. It's really fun. So it's not winter, but during the winter. The city of Chicago has about 300 plows that they have on standby whenever it snows. They deploy all these plows to plow on streets. And this is an app that is another sort of like milestone in sort of the work that I've been doing. Is like, okay, we had Chicago lobbyists, that was going well, and a few other different apps on the side. And it was really this one that actually sort of everything coalesced around the idea of open city. So the story behind this app is on January 3rd, 2012, actually John Toba announced there's a new app that the city of Chicago has made. It's called the Plow Tracker. It looks like this. And it's not on right now because there are no plows active. But you can see like behind the text an image of a city of Chicago and a bunch of little plow icons. So when it's on, this map shows you basically where all the plows currently are during a snowstorm. And what that does is really, I think the goal that the city had when they launched this was to say, hey, like, whenever it snows, like, we get a ton of calls from people saying, you guys aren't doing your job, you need to come plow my street, and like, it's just a lot of complaints. And so I believe one of the purposes of this app was to just say, hey, we're working on it, here are the plows, like, things are happening, your tax dollars at work, leave us alone. So they put this app out here, and it was like great. Like people were like, oh, awesome, and it was like an unprecedented amount of traffic on the City of Chicago website. It was like 4 times as much traffic on the city's website than they've ever had on any previous day. Because as some of you may know, Chicago has a very there's an infatuation with snow, right? Like mayoral elections have been won and lost because of snowplow, right? So people care very much about snowplows, but like only for like a very short period of time, like only when it's snowing, right? So they put this app out here. It was really awesome. They got a lot of good press for it, and we were like, man, this app is not useful to me. I don't know what I can do with this other than just seeing how much plows on the map. What would be more useful is to maybe say, when a street got plowed. So we toyed around with an idea for a while, like, okay, well maybe we could just like figure out how this map works and start collecting data on where the plows are. And then if you sort of watch that for a long enough period of time, you can get a history of every plow and where it's been. And so that's what we did. We wrote some code to go hit this page and capture the data every like 10 seconds or so, and basically built up information about where all the plows have been. And so the end result of that is this map, which shows you, and this is the last snowstorm, which was March 12th, it shows you every single street that got plowed during that by the City of Chicago plow. So you can click on each little street segment here, and plow S11713 was here on the 5:21 a.m.
Now, is there like some device that's actually on this tree?
Yes. So every plow has a GPS device in it that when the plow is on, it's broadcasting its signal to the city. And that's something that had been in trucks for a while. They've been using it basically to audit their own employees, like make sure they are plowing where they're supposed to be plowing. So they were using this data for their operations. And that was why they were able to release that app in the first place, because like, oh, we have this data, let's like publish this information in real time as we get it too, and like make this snap. So that's really the thing that enabled this to happen, is like all 300 plows have GPS. All publicly owned plows. There are some private plows.
So, but you can see then there are streets that they don't plow.
Right, and so this is something that we noticed too. And some of that is because they have other plows that are not tracked, that are privately owned. So like there's entire swaths of like some of the north side are just like empty. But that's just because we don't have any data on those plows. So again, just like the lobbyists say, like data is imperfect, right? And you do with it what you can, and you make it clear about what the limitations are on the data, right? But on average, this is a useful thing to see. So you can see where all the plows are. We actually archived every storm that ever happened, so you can go and download this data yourself if you're really interested. And then one thing we did this most recent winter is it's super slow right now. We were able to basically play back. This is what it looks like when this is how the city plows the streets. So this is just, each one of these is just like an observation of where a plow is. And you can kind of tell, so this is like over, I want to say like an 18-hour period or something like that. So one thing I have observed in watching 24 snowstorms unfold on a map like this is when it's snowing, they are only plowing the main streets, which is what you see here. Eventually, at some point, I want to say in a couple hours, all of a sudden all the plows go and like they hit side streets. And I found that that happens to coincide right with when it stops actually snowing. So they plow the mains until it stops snowing and then switch to the side streets. So it's going to happen about now. Yeah, okay, they fell on the side streets. Resolution of this map looks really bad on this screen. It's much cooler looking with higher resolution screen. Also things that and so yeah, it looks like, the city is being, deleted slowly. And then also, you notice these things over here. So like geocoding is another problem. So sometimes, especially downtown, these GPS devices, maybe you can notice this yourselves when you're on your phone, sometimes it might think you're not where you really are. And when it comes to being downtown, those tall buildings can really interfere with the GPS signal. So like oftentimes what happens is it's like, okay, I'm here, oh, I'm in Lake Michigan, and I'm back over here again. So that's again like just something that like is a relic of the technologies behind this stuff. So we launched this site back in February of 2012, and we got noticed by the Chicago Tribune. They wrote an article about it. And we're like, oh man, like we hit the mainstream. Man, we should really have a name for ourselves. What are we? And we like spent like the next like 30 minutes like arguing about what our name should be, and then we decided on Open City. So we really did it like as sort of like on a spur of the moment decision. But this was the app that sort of like solidified that and made Open City a thing. And now it's like a banner that we release a bunch of different apps. So this is a great example of an app that it had a lot of appeal. We got a ton of traffic too because again, people care quite a lot about snow when it happens, and we were able to kind of use it to sort of propel us into sort of the next big thing. So moving on, there are many apps. I can't get to them all. Let's continue to choose your own adventure. And you guys can choose between Chicago Public School Tiers, which is a tool for looking up what tier you live in if you're a CPS student. It's super wonky, but like a pretty important site. It has a really interesting story. Crime in Chicago is an app that shows all the shows crime that has happened per ward over about a 12-year period, so you can kind of see the trends for each ward over time. This is a story of an app that didn't go so well. How's Business is a dashboard of the economic status of Chicago based on some open data. We thought this would be super awesome, and no one cares about this. Edifice, huh?
It should.
I know, right? Edifice is one that may be more in your guys' wheelhouse. It is a set of maps of the built environment of the city of Chicago. So you can sort of see all the building footprints. This is not I didn't actually build. It was another person in the city, Juan Pablo. This one's pretty cool. Second City Zoning is a zoning lookup map based on a favorite computer video game of mine called SimCity 2000. And it is a way to look at something that's very boring, zoning, and doing it in a way that is a little bit more engaging.
Sure, listen to that one.
Okay, cool. I'll take that. So this is actually to date continues to be the most trafficked application that we built because it's actually like people have a lot of interest looking up this. So it's a map. It looks kind of weird at this level. What's our address? 35.
East Wax.
So, did you guys know that we are in a DX16 downtown mixed-use district? What does that mean? It means downtown high-rises. Like this is the data from the city, and this is like basically we took our own kind of simple layperson's description about what that actually means, and this is kind of like when I was talking about Chicago lobbyists, where we were saying this is like, here's the data, and like you make of it what you will. This is an app that we kind of had to add some narrative to it because nobody, like, zoning just is like so dense, like floor area ratio and like yard, front yard, side yard, setback, like things like that are like super important, and I'm sure you guys know all that stuff. But like the average person's like, okay, so we had to make it at least a little bit more simple. So that is why. So as we played the game SimCity 2000 or SimCity, any of them, come on. Yeah. Oh, is that music? Oh,
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what it is.
So I was like, great, zoning is interesting, but how do I show this, right? Well, one thing I could draw on is this game, right? And really I could just draw on like the color scheme, right? So they said green is residential, blue is commercial, yellow is industrial. And like, I'll just start with that and go from there. In reality, of course, it's more complicated than that. There exists all these areas which I decided to color red, which are planned developments, which are special exceptions to all those rules that are basically their own one-off designations. And then there's the downtown, and then the downtown is blue stuff is commercial. So you can kind of see, which is one of the things I really like about this app, is the kind of the makeup of the zoning and how that actually impacts the built environment. So, I mean, you guys know this. You walk down a main sort of street like Milwaukee here, and you'll see? You're going to see some storefronts, you're going to see some taller buildings, mixed-use buildings. Then you turn down a side street, and all of a sudden, oh, it's like a bunch of houses, like single-family homes or 3 flats. Well, that's all based on the zoning ordinance, right? And you can see that here in the map, right? I mean, we have these commercial corridors, and then we have these residential pockets in the middle. And then we also have Chicago's sort of big industrial sort of zones. You maybe have heard of the planned manufacturing districts. So if you've ever, you got the one over here, which is, each one has its own name. I don't think we have it listed on here, but you've got the stockyards down here, and you've got the Elston corridor up here. And if you guys know anything about that area, it's like slowly being carved up and changed into like condos, and like it's very like schizophrenic in some ways as far as like how like the buildings that are there. And you can actually see that on the map. It's like this once was a homogeneous industrial area, and like piece by piece, it's been slowly changed over time. So you can really see that here. And then one of the things that we actually get most of our traffic to the site is this page, which is the master explainer of what all of the different zoning classifications are. So you have your residential RS, so RS stands for single family. RT stands for residential townhouse, I think. And then there's RM, which is multi-unit. And then we have, and then as you can maybe know, the higher the number, the more dense it can be. And then we have business districts. And then in addition to business districts, we also have commercial districts, which are kind of confusing because they're sort of similar but sort of different. So I just colored them blue. Anyway, there's the downtown districts for special exceptions, right? Like, oh, we're downtown. There are only very, very tall buildings downtown because that's what it's zoned for. You can build tall. You can't build tall necessarily unless there's an exception, right? Anywhere else. There's weird service areas that are used for, say, like rail yards and things like that. Manufacturing districts, so these different manufacturing districts you can build, you know, sort of light industry, or you can have heavy manufacturing. That's all designated by this stuff. And then there's these planned developments, which is like the giant asterisk in front of all this stuff, which is like, or the city could just decide to do whatever they want, which is what happens in a lot of cases. Like if you look at, say, the first planned planned development, anybody know what the very, very first planned development is? PD0. Keep going. Dun, 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 dun. So, right? And so you can kind of see in a history, and I believe they're numbered chronologically. So that's 0. I forget where 1 is, but then there's Navy Pier, which is 527. You got, I guess, the Grant Park area. Down here, you got, what's this thing? That's the, it's like a water reclamation stuff. Yeah, so anyways, you can kind of see a history of all this stuff. And actually, if you click on each one, again, you can kind of see. We unfortunately don't link to each individual ordinance. That's like one of those things, like each one of these is an ordinance to like pass a special plan development, and it's got like typically plans and things like that in it. We're able to like do that linkage. Yeah, that would be cool to see though.
Is that because it's not available? Or
it's just that like there's no explicit link like that's available in the data, so we basically have to kind of go and like so first of all, some of these things like O'Hare, when was that built in like the 50s, I want to say. Like that ordinance exists somewhere, probably in the city clerk's office. It's not digitized, right? So we have to go and like look that up, right? And that's that's work. So anyways, this is a pretty fun one. And then we also tried to do what we could to explain some of the key concepts about what is FAR and FAR. lot area per unit, and all these things, right? So just to try to give citizens like a little bit more of an understanding about this pretty dense topic and make it a little bit fun to do. And we also threw some music in there too, so you can listen to the SimCity theme song. I don't know if the speakers on this thing work. Okay, well, maybe they don't. Anyways, imagine sweet music from 1995. And there's sound effects too. You can also like turn on and off the different layers so you can see, just show me the industrial areas. And you can kind of see what's going on right now. So this app is actually on display at the City of Big Data Architecture exhibit. The Architecture Foundation put on. It's in one of the little kiosks. Have you guys been to this thing? You should totally go. You haven't. It's awesome. It's like they have the model of the city of Chicago, and they rigged up 6 projectors to shoot data at it. And so there's a bunch of different animations they have, like potholes over like a 3 or 4 month period as they get requested or called in from like 311. They have the different energy use by city block. They have building age. So they have a bunch of different stuff. It's pretty neat. Any questions on this one?
It's very cool.
All right.
Thanks.
So as a result of, has anything come from this app? Is anyone built on top of something?
So yeah, people go to the site. We get cited a lot. I know people use it and just look up addresses on it. Like that's the most common thing. People just like enter in a random address to find that information. The city has their own zoning lookup tool. Yeah, I thought so too. So I think some people use this as a replacement for that. Although there's things that app will show you that we don't show. Like they have more layers on there. But if all you want to know is what's the zoned as, that's pretty good for that. But yeah, as far as like anything that's like people have done stuff on, I know people have used it for research. There's this guy who's done some work, he's like a policy blogger, and he's used the site because like he doesn't like zoning in Chicago. He doesn't like the rules and the putting place. He has opinions about how they have ruined so many neighborhoods. So he's used that. Okay, so we can talk about another one and just a time check. It's already 7:09.
I don't know if you want to like briefly. Related to that question, I think is, and that you were describing to me, which was like how this type of information is then really used by residents in making this information available for the developed areas of the city. They can buy a lot for $1.
Oh yeah, totally. I can totally talk about that. That's a fun one. So yeah, so this is all open city stuff, but the one you're referring to is actually a project that I got paid to do, which is a nice evolution of all the stuff I've been showing you. So I've been showing you all these like projects that I basically built for free for fun, and now I've been able to start my own company. There's 4 of us now, and do this kind of work for hire. So this is a really fun one. It's called Large Lots. It is a project that, so maybe you've heard about this in the news. The city of Chicago has somewhere on the order of 12 to 15,000 vacant lots that they have just come into possession of over the years. Houses get foreclosed on, and the city is basically the ones holding the bag, right? They're the ones that end up with these properties. And so they just make accruing vacant lots over, I don't even know how many decades, a long time. I know some of these properties have been owned for over 100 years. So, or maybe like 98 years is like the oldest I've heard. So it was decided about a couple years ago to have a policy change and try to unload some of this inventory. And there were already mechanisms in place to have, like, you right now could go and buy any pros to buy a lot from the city of Chicago at any time. And there's a process for doing that. You have to get city council approval. You have to go through like a whole rigmarole to figure that out, right? So they wanted to make the process easier. So they started a pilot program in the greater Inglewood area. And they basically said, all right, we have all these lots. We're going to sell them to you for $1. The only restriction is there's a few of them, but the big one is you have to live on the same block as one of these lots. And the reason for that is they just don't want some random person coming in and like swooping up all of Inglewood or or something like that, right? I mean, that kind of thing has happened in Detroit, for example, and like auction, like properties will just go to auction, and like outsiders will just buy it and would sit on it and wait, you know, and like property will like go into decay and they don't live there, and don't care, and they're just sitting. So they wanted people in the neighborhoods to be the ones that own this stuff. So hence that kind of restriction. So the city pushed this pilot out, and they put it on the City of Chicago website. It was basically a page that said paragraphs of text. Here are your instructions. You can buy these lots for $1. You have to live on the same block. Here's a PDF map of the area. Here is a PDF of the application form you have to fill out. Here's a link to the city's zoning tool. Here's a list of all properties that we own, which is like a 15,000 row spreadsheet. Here are all the pieces, like go forth and like buy a lot, right? So that was their official page on like how to do this. So like that's hard for anybody to figure out, even what's available. So we were already working with this group called LISC, which is the Local Initiative Support Corporation, and they do a lot of work in the neighborhoods, especially in Inglewood and places like East Garfield Park. And they were able to basically come up with funding to pay us to make essentially like a marketing site for this program, right? So that's what Large Lots is. It was built by us to help the city facilitate this program. And the first pilot started in the greater Inglewood area. Somewhere on the order of 4,000 lots were available. These are all the green parcels. These are the lots that are owned by the city of Chicago and are vacant and are for sale. And the city launched this program. They got 414 applications, which doesn't seem like a lot, but compare that to the previous year. The city sold 35 properties in an entire year for the entire city, using like before they had this policy. So the policy was good. We wanted to support that, and we used this app to make it much easier. So people could just click on a lot, and you can kind of see the details. Like here's a screen, here's a picture of it. You can also like enter your address and see what lots are near you, and then we have all the information about it. Like here's what it's zoned, and here's the square feet, that kind of stuff. And then we had some instructions on how to fill out the application. So this was like a pretty good, I guess, a success. The city got way more response than they thought they would get, and so they're like, all right, we're going to open it up in another area. We're going to open it up in East Garfield Park, and we decided that was like a great opportunity to keep making this thing better. So we changed the application to be completely online, and we rolled it out about a couple days before the pilot started. It shut down now because it just ended on Monday. But as of the end of that pilot, the total number of applications. So this area, as you can kind of tell, is much smaller. There's about 10% of the lots available. Is about 400 or so available over here, as opposed to 4,000 over there. We got almost as many applications, and 60% of all available lots were applied for. So we made the process even easier, and people used it even more. So this is a story that I really like to tell because it's an example of the civic technology community building something and using all the skills that I've been developing and our whole community's been developing over the years to do this kind of work in the first place. I mean, we were able to put this together. Like, the first version of it was done in a week, and we were able to get it out there. And it was, it's a combination of that and then like all the community engagement that took to get this policy put up in the first place. And the best part about it is I got paid to do it, right? So like I'm doing all this good work, and finally, finally I got paid to do, like, you know, I mean, we have like all other projects too, but this one is like very much in line with all the other projects that I've done, except that it's for a particular purpose and goal and group, and there was like funds available to pay us to do it. So I think it's a sign of maturity, both for like myself and my company, but also for the community as a whole, right? I mean, volunteerism is great. I continue to do it, but if this stuff is going to continue on, like someone's got to pay for it, right? And that's the engine that really we need to focus on to make this stuff sustain and actually have an impact, right? I mean, there's only so much volunteerism we can do. There's a limit to it. And I think that to really have as much impact as possible, like businesses need to start existing, right, doing this stuff, right? Or yeah, even nonprofits, right? I mean, there just needs to be somebody who thinks this is worthwhile enough to like put money towards it. So I think that's maybe a good stopping point. Does anybody have any questions on this or anything else I did or didn't talk about?
I saw on the landing page of the one of large lots that you had a GitHub link.
Mm-hmm.
Is this all open source as well?
It is. So is there a page? Yeah. So the philosophies from the first site, Chicago Lobbyists. That's like my company also follows those philosophies, right? Open source code, right? So we release all the code that we do for free. All the data is made open, so we actually had to create some new files for the site, like all the lots and everything. We had to merge a bunch of data together, make those available. And again, it's just like, it's open. It's as far as like, here's what's available. And like, here is all about getting people to be more active and involved in their community. So, yeah.
Sorry. Was that a stipulation that you had made? So who was the client for this?
Like a client, and I know it's confusing because you think the city would pay for it.
Right.
Still haven't had that happen quite yet. Working on it. It's a nonprofit organization here in Chicago.
I see. Okay. So
their interest is particularly in serving certain areas of the city that are typically left behind as far as like resources go, right? So East Garfield Park, Humboldt Park, Inglewood, Woodlawn. Those areas are like the areas of focus, and they partner with community groups that are already based in those areas, and just support them with giving them resources like us, right, to pay for technical resources, and also just facilitation of grants, basically, because they all have their own sort of like issues that they work on. So, yeah.
I was going to ask, are all of the available lots citywide available, or is it just
only in the pilot areas?
Pilot areas?
Yeah, I don't know exactly the plan. If they're going to roll it out to more neighborhoods, I haven't heard yet. But I can imagine that eventually the plan would maybe be to after these pilots prove to be successful, they'll roll it out for the whole city.
Did you file a freedom of information on that?
On that information? Could if it existed, and that's what I'm saying, is I don't think they've decided. Yeah. So that is a restriction of FOIA. There has to be some sort of document. I mean, that happens, right? Like, I think someone was telling me about there's a new development in their neighborhood. Like, there's a school in that's basically using eminent domain to like take a bunch of property around them, and they are trying to FOIA the information around like what are the architecture plans, what areas they're trying to move into, and they deny the FOIA request because they say the plans haven't been like finalized yet, which is like. You could like maybe even see it as like a way to avoid FOIA laws. Like it's not approved, and then it's approved and it's done, right? Like that kind of stuff can happen. So yeah. Other questions?
Have you considered like crowdsourcing funding, like for the maintenance thing? Like it'll take 40 hours or whatever to update.
Yeah.
I bet you could get a grant on Kickstarter.
So yeah, actually for Clear Streets, we thought about doing a Kickstarter for it. And the thing about that is it takes a shit ton of effort to have a successful Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah.
Like you got to come up with like tiered prizes. You got to like come up with a cool, high quality production video showing what you're gonna do. And it's like by the time we did all of that, we just done what we wanted to do, right? So that's one of the things that like we looked at it. And we're like, what can we offer? It's like a prize. Like, one idea was literally like, name your own plow or something. Like, you can claim a plow. Like, but like, that is kind of silly. So anyways, like, we did think about it, but ultimately, yeah, just
Learn potato salad at $55,000.
I know, stupid stuff gets funded on Kickstarter right now.
But I mean, like for the question, because I had the same thing too, is the lobbyist data, like was backdated to 2010. I'm like, I don't really care. I've got no vested interest, but I bet you somebody does, and I bet you somebody else does, and somebody else does. And if you just put a banner at the top, like next to 2010, like click here to donate to our Kickstarter campaign. Once we reach this number, we will update, and just sit on it until you reach that number. And I bet you just a link there as long as there's like not a harsh time deadline on it.
I wonder, what are the restrictions? So, like, would you have to set up a 501c3 to accept donations, or could you just, like, I'm not sure where the legality of that goes, right?
But like, you'd basically be paying, your prize would be this thing eventually gets updated.
Sure.
Like, that's the prize. That's the only prize. Donate however much you want. That's the prize. It's for profit. Like, maybe not even through Kickstarter. Just here's the link to accept the credit.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting approach. I guess my philosophy on this stuff has changed a little bit over the course of time. I love building things for someone that, like, for a client that has a purpose and a goal behind it. That's really powerful to have. It really sort of separates what's important from what's not important. When someone's like saying, like, I'm paying you to do X, right? And like, we're very selective about who we end up working with, because they kind of have to follow like the kind of philosophy we want. But when you have a client and someone's saying, this is important enough to me, that like makes, like, that's the reason why the apps that we've made with the DataMade banner, I think, are as good as they are, right? And that's why large lots is so good, because there's a purpose and a goal, and like, you're somebody paying for it. So collecting money is cool, but the thing is, that's not stopping me from doing it. Like, like if someone just said, here's $10,000, go do this, that's weird compared to just saying, like, you know, I'm paying you to do this, as opposed to just, here's money, right? I guess, does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, what's to kind of overcome that, making some new shiny thing versus to keep maintaining old things that they.
So like I think, like I said, for the lobbyist app, I would do it if I found someone who had a real vested interest in doing something with that data, right? Whether or not that's like, you know, the Tribune or some other activist group. I want to be engaged with a group that wants to have ownership of that thing beyond the work that I'm going to do on it. Because that is one of the things that I've found is these apps need a home oftentimes, right? So a lot of those things I've shown you, some of them automatically update, but some of them are just kind of like snapshots in time, right? And they don't get updated. And like, as far as like being a developer goes, like, I'm again much more interested in building new things, right? That's much more interesting for me. I would much rather build something and then hand it off to somebody else for them to own it, maintain it, and like do all the things that you need to do, like add more content, right? You know, basically give it all the support that it needs to actually succeed. I'd much rather do it that way as opposed to sort of collecting like a bunch of things I have to continue to maintain. Right? You're welcome to take the app. It's all out there.
So what sort of things have come out of OpenGov HackNet?
Oh, great question. So,
anything in the built environment, or is it mostly?
So we have a project page that we try to keep track. This is mostly for our purposes, but these are all the projects that are currently being worked on by the community. There are a lot. There's like, how many? 138 on here at this point. So a lot of what's come out of the Hack Night are like different working groups and different, like, certain apps have sort of like been sort of ideated at the Hack Night. And one in particular that I really like to talk about is called schoolcuts.org. Have you guys heard of this website before? Last summer, they had the school closings, right? And this is something that was like a period of like turmoil in the city. People were very confused. Even CPS seemed like they were confused. Like there was a big debate, and like parents were just like, "What's going on? I have no idea. Like, what schools are here closing?" This app is basically for that, for parents to say, "This is what's going on. This is how many students are affected. Here are the schools that are closing." And they were like following and updating the data as it was changing. Because CPS was like, release some data, and then they slightly changed certain things. So it's complicated, as you can maybe imagine. Here are all the schools that are affected, which means some are closing, some are phasing out over 2 years, some are relocating, and some are receiving schools. So you can kind of see, you can filter this list by that, right? And then each page has information about that school, where it is. Okay. This is that school, the boundary, the school boundary for that school, the receiving school for it, sorry, this is a receiving school. This is the school that's closing and receiving all the students, and then here's all the other schools around it. And then they have information on demographics, they have information on test scores, they have information on what, like basically all the criteria that CPS was saying was the reason they were closing or not closing the school. So the idea behind this came out of a group of people that were just very interested in education and met at the hackathon. And they worked on this app, and it was like I wouldn't say it was a success in that like the school still got closed, but it gave the parents the ability to actually like know what was going on, right? Be able to be prepared for it. And some people actually went and like printed out the pages from this site and like brought them to these like town hall meetings, and it was like, look, you're closing my school, yet the numbers don't support that, right? Or like even your own numbers don't support that. Like, what are you doing, right? So it was like actually a really cool organizing tool as well. So I would say that the Hack Night itself is really a place for people to sort of get together and network, and sometimes work on stuff, and sometimes like build really cool things like this. And there's a bunch of active apps going on right now. There's one in particular. If you live in a building that has 5 or more units, the city does not provide you with a blue recycling bin. If you're the owner of that building, you have to provide it yourself. There's an ordinance on the books that says if you don't have a blue bin, or sorry, recycling services, as a landlord, you'll be fined up to $100 a day. That ordinance, as far as I can tell, is not enforced. So the result is that these 5+ unit buildings, anybody live in a 5+ unit building? Do you have recycling?
Yes.
You do?
Recently, though.
Yeah?
After we petitioned for it.
Okay, so you as like the residents of the building did?
Yeah.
Right, so that's kind of the idea behind the app, is to say, where is this a problem? So you can like enter your address on the map, and it'll show like all the places that people have entered in, crowdsourcing it, say these are the places that don't have recycling, and use that as a way to sort of say, like, this is an issue, like, hello city, why don't you enforce this, right? And sort of get at it from like sort of the public sort of interaction kind of way. So that's an example of an app that's happening that's being worked on right now.
They don't enforce it because they don't recycle.
I mean, the city has the Blue Bin program. I mean, that's a whole other issue. It's like how effective that is, right? Like, there's the single stream recycling facility. I've seen a video. There's apparently like a big conveyor belt, and there's like a bunch of blades that spin and chew the trash up. And then there's like magnets that suck out all the metal, and another one that collects the glass. And then you're left with this like cardboardy meal stuff, which then gets recycled somewhere else. So they claim 80% like the material is reclaimed. I don't know. Let's make it up. Yeah, there's a ton. So I mean, that's the thing. Like, there's so much going on in the city that like the Hacknet is actually like broken out into like we actually organize CAP based on like topic groups. So there's a group that meets on just education every week. There's a group that meets just on transportation, and another one that meets just on environments. That's where the recycling app came from. There's a group that meets on like vacant buildings, right? And like people are just invited to start their own groups if they want to. And so the idea is just a place to talk about these issues in some cases, and in other cases like to actually like find out, is there data available? Can there be happening? So it's really kind of exploded as far as we had 80 people there last night, and 38 of them were women. 42 of them. So I think, I don't know if you've heard much about like the whole like 1 in 5 women in technology. We're killing it. So I think that's another awesome sort of metric that as far as the inclusiveness and openness of opportunity. So
Is that every Tuesday?
every Tuesday at 1871, 6 p.m. Yep.
So you sort of touched upon it, but like I've always found that the major sort of problem with the big data trend is that you only get what you look for, not necessarily what's actually there inherent in the data. So I was wondering if have you made any efforts to look at like some of these different data sets and make correlations between data, or have you considered actually like an app or like open sourcing what kind of data should be collected from the city, things like that?
Okay, so data never speaks for itself, right? Yeah, you can make the data tell you anything you want to hear. right? And data is full of lies, right? Like it is the data that you're getting from the city of Chicago is an output of a process that wasn't the original process was not to release open data. The original process was to facilitate the permitting of buildings or to track where our plow drivers are going, right? So open data is actually like sort of a byproduct of all that stuff, which is something that you really need to take into account when you're working with it, right? Because they're not going to collect whatever you think is important. They're going to collect what's essential to their functioning, like the business functions of government, right? So you need to know that. I would say if you can notice a trend about all the different apps we've done, they're very focused, not only on like just Chicago, but like a very specific part of Chicago, right? Like crime or zoning or lobbyists. And I have a personal philosophy behind that it needs to be focused on a certain sort of tangible thing for it to really be relatable. There's a lot of people who are like, well, these apps, they're not scalable. I need this thing to be in 50 cities for it to be any good. And I actually think it's the opposite. You need to do it well once at least before you can do it well in 50 cities, right? So yeah, every city has crime. But there's very particular things about crime in Chicago. Not only the trends and where it's happening, but the CPD collects data very differently. Every police agency collects it very differently. They even have their own way of coding the types of crime that is not the same as anybody else. They use like the Illinois Standard Crime Reporting Standard, which is not used by any other state, if you can imagine, right? So there's a lot of nuance, and you have to know a ton. You have to do a ton of research to figure out even what the data is telling you and what it's not telling you. So that's really what all these things kind of are doing, is exploring sort of one very narrow protocol of open data back to the internet.
Cool. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks guys.